Have you ever attempted to balance a 5 or 6 pound dumbbell on top of your head for several hours straight? Now imagine doing this every single day during official state functions under the watchful eyes of hundreds of dignitaries, while simultaneously making decisions that will shape the fate of an entire empire. Our entire lives, we have been fed a distorted understanding of royal authority and its symbols. Historians eagerly convince us that gold, diamonds, and heavy metallic bands serve merely as symbols of wealth and divine appointment. But let us engage our critical thinking and set aside the fairy tales from grade school textbooks. Do you genuinely believe that the most powerful individuals on the planet, commanding unlimited resources, would voluntarily subject themselves to physical torment just for an impressive image? Or are we perhaps witnessing a cargo cult phenomenon where the true purpose of an object was forgotten while its external form was carefully preserved? What if I were to suggest that the crown is not an emblem of power, but rather a sophisticated technical apparatus that either dramatically enhanced cognitive abilities or, far more disturbingly, suppressed them, transforming the ruler into an obedient puppet? Take a closer look at the British imperial state crown, or the crown of St. Edward. If you strip away the aesthetic reverence instilled by museum tour guides, you will discern a precise engineering structure. What we see is a closed circuit made of metal possessing the highest electrical conductivity. Gold and silver are not simply precious metals. They are ideal conductors, utilized in every microchip inside your smartphone or computer. Now ask yourself, why would anyone place on the most vital part of the body, the head, where the brain resides, a perfect conducting circuit decorated with crystals? Crystals, for your information, serve as resonators in radio electronics, quartz, diamond, ruby. All of them exhibit piezoelectric properties, or the capacity to refract not just visible light, but waves of specific frequencies. We are not looking at jewelry. We are looking at a schematic diagram. Moreover, a schematic positioned directly on the skull of a human operator. Let us begin with something historians prefer not to discuss. Pick up any genealogical reference on European royal houses over the past 3 centuries, and you will uncover a disturbing pattern. An overwhelming percentage of crowned heads suffered from mysterious nervous disorders, epileptic seizures, agonizing migraines, and conditions then called melancholy, but which modern psychiatrists would diagnose as severe depression or even schizophrenia. Academic science happily attributes everything to inbreeding and dynastic degeneration. Supposedly, too many cousins married cousins, hence the genetic defects. But permit me to doubt this overly convenient explanation. Recall the madness of King George III of Britain or the inexplicable fits that plagued various members of the Romanov dynasty. The clinical picture in these cases remarkably resembles the symptomatology of high-frequency electromagnetic exposure on the human brain. What if these individuals wore functioning generators on their heads, whose insulation gradually deteriorated, and this invisible fire slowly incinerated their sanity from within? What if the cause lies not in genetics, but in what might be termed occupational hazard of the royal profession? Now let us consider the manufacturing timelines of these artifacts. According to official records, the great imperial crown of Russia was created in just 2 months. Let that number sink in. 60 days. This piece contains nearly 5,000 diamonds, flawlessly matched by size, clarity, and cut, 75 pearls, and an incredibly complex metallic framework. Try today with our laser technology, three-dimensional modeling, and electric tools to commission any jeweler to produce work of comparable complexity within such a time frame. They would laugh in your face. In the 18th century, by dim candlelight, with primitive hand tools, without optical instruments, this was physically impossible. Elementary arithmetic demonstrates to set 5,000 stones in 60 days, a craftsman would need to work around the clock, without sleep or food, mounting 1 stone every 15 minutes. And this excludes time required for cutting, polishing, and constructing the frame. The logical conclusion presents itself: either we are being deceived about the timelines or about the technologies, or about the very origin of the dynasties themselves. Most likely, this equipment was inherited by new rulers from that very civilization swept away by the wave of collective amnesia. Official historiography remains silent on why the configuration of crowns across all corners of the globe is virtually identical. Pointed arches, domes, closed bands. This resembles either an antenna capturing a signal or a Faraday cage shielding the brain from external influences. Let us turn to physiology. Any spine specialist will confirm that constant wearing of a weight of several pounds on the head inevitably leads to compression of cervical vertebrae, disrupted blood circulation, and chronic headaches. Were emperors inclined towards self-torture, or was the functionality of this device so critical that physical comfort had to be sacrificed for something more substantial? Examine the portraits of rulers from the 15th through 19th centuries. Study their faces. Do you often notice joy there? Or do you see the mark of strange detachment, as if their consciousness dwells somewhere else entirely, or is perhaps suppressed? We are accustomed to explaining this as the burden of responsibility. But what if the burden was literal and electromagnetic in nature? The weight of the great imperial crown approached nearly 2 kilograms. The cap of monomach weighed approximately 1 kilogram. And this excludes the weight of the mantle and scepter, an enormous load on the musculoskeletal system. But the most curious aspect lies in the choice of materials. Why specifically gold? Why not steel, which is lighter and stronger? Why not wood or leather? The official version speaks of expense and status. But from the standpoint of physics, gold is a unique metal that does not oxidize and possesses stable conductivity. If you are constructing a complex device that must function for centuries without repair, you choose gold. If you are crafting merely an ornate hat, gold is the worst choice due to its softness and weight. Jewelers had to employ incredible tricks to prevent the frame from warping under its own mass. Why such complications if the goal is simply to impress? Now regarding the stones. Any physicist will attest that diamonds, rubies, and sapphires are not merely glittering trinkets. These are crystals with rigid lattice structures capable of the piezoelectric effect. When compressed, such a crystal generates an electrical impulse. When current is applied, it begins vibrating at high frequency. In 20th century radio technology, quartz resonators form the heart of any transmitter. Without them, tuning to the correct wavelength was impossible. Look at the crowns. The stones are not merely glued in place. They are clamped in metal settings, prongs that create constant pressure. This is not decoration. These are activated elements of a circuit. Pay attention to a detail we have grown accustomed to ignoring: the lining. Almost all crowns have inside them a cap of velvet or other dense fabric. We are told this is for comfort, so the metal does not chafe the skin. Seriously? You manufacture a symbol of power costing the annual budget of a small nation and use cloth for comfort? From a technical perspective, this lining performs the role of a dielectric, an insulator. If you were to place an exposed high-voltage circuit directly on the moist skin of the head, you would simply be electrocuted or have your brain fried. The insulating layer is necessary for operator safety. Here is yet another indication that we are dealing with an electrical device, not a hat. There exists another troubling element of royal regalia: the orb, a golden sphere topped with a cross. Historians mumble about the symbol of the earthly globe, but the concept of the globe as a model of Earth came into common use considerably later than the orb. View this sphere through the eyes of an engineer. A sphere made of conductor and antenna on top. This is a classic capacitor, a charge accumulator, or else a component of a Van de Graaff generator. Together with the scepter and crown, this formed a closed circuit. The scepter served as grounding or a directing electrode, the orb as a power source or accumulator of static electricity, the crown as resonator and interface connecting to the operator. The monarch in full regalia was not simply a dressed-up person. He was a living connecting jumper in a powerful energy installation. Examine the architecture of palaces where these regalia were stored and utilized. Throne rooms are not living quarters. They are technical compartments. Gigantic mirrors, crystal chandeliers, gold, marble. No restrooms, no kitchens, yet enormous ceilings in specific wall geometry. This is a signal amplification scheme. Mirrors and crystal form a system of reflectors and concentrators. The throne is the operator station. The crown is the receiver. The entire palace represents a giant circuit board where the human is merely one of the transistors. Here we approach the most worrying aspect, the concept of blue blood. We are accustomed to perceiving this as an elegant metaphor for aristocratic lineage, but let us examine the matter from the standpoint of biochemistry and conductor physics. Human blood is red due to hemoglobin, which is based on iron, but in nature there exists blood based on copper, hemocyanin. It truly has a bluish tint and is found in certain mollusks and arthropods. But the key is not the color, it is the property. Copper is a far more efficient electrical conductor than iron. What if the ancient ruling elite, those same gods or titans of mythology, truly possessed a different chemical composition of blood that allowed them to interact directly with these energy devices without harm to their health? The crown was for them a natural extension of the nervous system. But when ordinary people came to power, the red-blooded, or descendants of mixed unions where the copper blood gene was lost or diluted, the devices became mortally dangerous for them. They attempted to wear them, imitating the gods, but instead of power, they received radiation sickness, madness, and premature death. Here is your answer to the degeneration of monarchical dynasties. The issue was not marriages between relatives, but the incompatibility between the biological iron of humans and the technological software of the crown. Is this not why the coronation ceremony was always sacred and mandatory? Is this not why the monarch had no right to remove the crown at certain moments, even if dying from pain? This resembles a procedure for connecting to a server. And while the connection is established, the person on the throne is not an individual but a terminal. Look at paintings of coronations, enormous halls, high vaults, the specific acoustics of cathedrals. Cathedrals, incidentally, are themselves gigantic resonators, constructed according to the laws of wave physics rather than religion. Organs, bells, all of these are instruments for creating sound waves of specific frequencies. And there in the center of this acoustic cauldron stands a person upon whom a metal receiver is placed. The sound vibrations of the cathedral enter into resonance with the crystals of the crown. The piezoelectric effect converts sound into electricity. The field activates, and the operator enters an altered state of consciousness. The crowd experiences awe not because of the sanctity of the moment, but because of powerful electromagnetic radiation affecting their psyche. This was a technology of mass control, operating on principles of physics that we are only beginning to rediscover. There exists a theory that academics diligently ridicule, but which flawlessly explains all the inconsistencies. According to it, before a global cataclysm that occurred by all appearances in the 15th or 16th century and wiped from the face of the earth the preceding highly developed civilization, these devices were used for direct communication. This was wireless communication technology integrated with a biological operator. The crown allowed the ruler, or more precisely, the territorial administrator, to remain in constant contact with the unified information field or control center. But after the catastrophe, when infrastructure was destroyed and knowledge was lost, new elites who seized power on the ruins of the old world discovered these artifacts. They no longer understood the principle of their operation. They saw only that those who wore these objects before commanded the elements and nations. And blind copying began, cargo cult in action. They created copies from gold and gemstones, attempting to reproduce the form of functioning devices, hoping to acquire the same power. Consider why in all the museums of the world we are shown crowns manufactured no earlier than the 17th through 19th centuries. Where are the ancient crowns? Where are the headpieces of kings who ruled millennia ago? We are told, melted down, stolen, lost. Very convenient. The entire material base of the past has seemingly evaporated. I believe the genuine functioning devices were confiscated. What we see in the Tower of London or the Kremlin armory are mock-ups. These are copies created by jewelers who reproduce the external appearance but did not grasp the principle of operation. They inserted glass instead of piezo crystals, used alloys with low conductivity, and violated the geometry of the circuit. At some point, probably in the middle of the 19th century, the switch was flipped off. An event occurred that we call the Great Reset or the Flood. Atmospheric electricity vanished or altered its parameters. The ether ceased to be dense, and this entire grandiose system transformed into a heap of useless junk. Palaces became cold and uncomfortable museums, crowns became heavy hats, and monarchs became merely actors playing the role of rulers of a world they no longer controlled. It is precisely during this period that we observe an inexplicable demographic explosion. The planet's population suddenly begins growing exponentially. Where did these billions of people come from if for millennia the population remained stable? Where did the technologies of steam engines, electricity, and internal combustion engines emerge from almost simultaneously, as if someone opened a floodgate of information? History began to be rewritten. Technical terms were replaced with religious dogmas. Ether became a forbidden word in science, though Mendeleev himself included it in his table. Knowledge of conductivity, resonance, and the influence of fields on the brain was declared heresy or consigned to oblivion. We stand on the threshold of a frightening discovery. The entire history of monarchy that we were taught may prove to be a history of technological enslavement. Rulers whom we considered tyrants or great reformers may have been merely hostages of technology whose operating principle they themselves did not fully comprehend. They were operators shackled in golden chains, connected to a system controlled by someone else, someone who remained in the shadows, someone who knew the true purpose of gold, crystals, and field geometry. Why is acknowledgement of the technological nature of power so carefully concealed? Because this would destroy the foundation of modern civilization. If it becomes known that power was granted not by God, but by a gadget, then the legitimacy of all ruling dynasties will crumble to dust. Moreover, this will lead to the question, who manufactured these gadgets? What highly developed civilization controlled our ancestors, issuing them remote controls for managing populations? And where did these masters disappear to? Have you noticed how awkward and unnatural monarchs appear in photographs from the late 19th century? In their eyes, there is fear and bewilderment. They knew the truth. They knew they were imposters, wearing on their heads dead devices of a dead civilization. They knew about the substitution, and they knew their time was running out. This is precisely why all the great empires fell so easily at the beginning of the 20th century. It was a planned demolition of scenery that was no longer needed by the shadow puppeteers. Crowns were sent to museums, and the people were sent into new, even more rigid frameworks of ideological and economic slavery. But the golden cage for the brain did not disappear. It evolved, miniaturized, became invisible. Look at what is happening today. We are persistently offered implantable chips, neural interfaces, and constant carrying of a communication device. Do you think this is progress? No, this is the final stage of that very plan that began with the forging of the first imperial crown. Only now the role of the golden band is performed by the smartphone and the role of the ethereal network by cell towers and satellite internet. The principle remains unchanged. Connect a biological object to a unified digital matrix in order to control their thoughts, emotions, and actions. Monarchs of the past suffered from headaches because the technology was crude. We today suffer from panic attacks, attention deficit, and chronic fatigue because the influence has become subtler but more extensive. We voluntarily carry our crowns in our pockets, not even suspecting that we are prisoners of a digital cargo cult. Why is it precisely now in the 21st century that the topic of Tartaria and alternative history has so sharply surfaced? Why have millions of people suddenly begun noticing buried first floors and impossible architecture? Because the effect of the blockade is ending. The frequency of planetary vibrations is changing. Even official instruments measuring the Schumann resonance are recording this. The cage for the mind is cracking. The old instruments of control are ceasing to function, and those who stand behind the curtain, those who place these shackles on the heads of monarchs, are in a panic preparing a new reset for us. They understand that we are beginning to remember.